All right, we're going to get started in just a minute. I have way too much to say today, so we're going to get started. I'm going to let you guys sit down and get comfy, cozy. Thank you, Linda, for shutting that door. All right. All right, so we are going to get started. Today we didn't make it very far, so I was actually messaging with Jody this week, and I was like, I think it's going to take us a little while to get through Philippians, because it's been 5 weeks, and I'm just going to end on verse 18 today. So before we get started in the verses, I'm just going to take a second to lift us up in prayer. Dear Lord, I just thank you so much that you are in this room with us, that you're this space for the Women's Sunday School is just so important. As women, we get to fellowship together and learn more about you together. So I just thank you for this time, Lord. I just pray that we will just get into your word and we'll hear exactly what you want us to hear, Lord, as we just go through Philippians and what you were saying through Paul. I pray this in your name. Amen. So today we've been going through Philippians, and today we're going to focus on Philippians 1, 15 through 18. So I'm going to read those verses really quick, and then as per usual, I'll break them down. So Philippians 1, 15 through 18. So it says in there, some to be sure are preaching Christ even from envy and strife, but some also from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, rather than from pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice. So I was reading that from ESV. It might be a little bit different if you have a different version out there. But to understand the point of these four, I feel really loud. To understand the point of these four verses, you must understand God's gracious sovereignty that can turn, we know where Paul is, right? Where's Paul? In prison. Thanks, Peach. God's gracious sovereignty can turn prison and bad motives into the advancement of the gospel. A couple weeks ago, Erica read verse 12, so I'm just going to jump back there. In verse 12, Paul says, "Now I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel." And we should be surprised by that, because Paul is celebrating the gospel, that the gospel truth overrides his sorrow at defective motives that we're going to talk about. So he wants the message to be shared, and he is sad at the defective motives, but he's rejoicing that Christ is being proclaimed. But these proclaimers are sinning while they're proclaiming. I had to say that sentence slow because I wanted to get proclaimers in there as much as I could. They're trying to make Paul feel jealous that they're free while he's in prison. It should be even more surprising that they feel like this. I don't think that they read verse 12. I don't think they did that, because, now I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel. Their sinful behavior is the opposite way that the gospel would actually have somebody act. They're preaching the gospel and contradicting what they're saying with their motives. I just saw this really interesting point as well, because in Philippians, he's saying message over messenger, where in Galatians, he actually calls down a curse on bad preaching. So I was like, well, what's the difference? Like, if you're doing it with bad motives or you're not sharing the right message, like, what's the difference? But there is a big difference. So in Galatians, went backwards, not forward. Galatians 1, verse 8. Galatians 1, verse 8, it says, "But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached to you, he is to be accursed." So in Galatians, he's cursing. In Philippians, he's saying, you're sharing the gospel. And here's the difference. That is my ringtone. I was like, oh. So what's the difference between Galatians and Philippians? The difference is in the word. There is no evidence in Philippians that these hypocritical preachers are saying false things when they preach the gospel. They're true Christians. They were preaching the true gospel message. The Galatians were distorting the gospel. And Paul, just like us, is more agitated when the gospel itself is defective, rather than the people who share the true gospel may be defective, right? We're sinful people. So 2 things. Rejoice because God can override prison and poor motives to advance the gospel. 2, value the truth of the gospel more highly than you value the attitude of the person who shares it. I got some hmms on that. All right, so Philippians 1:15, we're going to start there. So in Philippians 1:15, again, it says, some to be sure are preaching Christ even from envy and strife, but some also from good will. So we immediately see 2 very different motives. We see selfish motives and others of selflessness and goodwill. So I wanted to take a moment to define the word motive. All right. So as a noun, it means something such as a need or desire that causes a person to act. We most likely use it as a verb, like the word motivate. So have you ever been motivated by something, right? Have you ever been motivated? Or maybe you use the same sentence I use. Man, I got to get motivated to do this, right? And it usually is in front of a task that I don't want to do. Usually in front of a task I don't want to do. So we can be motivated by a message, by a song, by a good deed, by a friend, but we can also be motivated by things like acceptance, popularity, and money. So in this verse, you may be wondering the question that many people ask: how could someone preach Christ out of envy, strife, or selfish motives? I'm so glad you asked, because we struggle with this, right? If you see somebody that you believe has a selfish motive and they're preaching Christ, you struggle with that. You immediately probably think that this person can't be a Christian. But guess what? Christians sin. Even with our new heart in God, we still have to deal with our remaining sinful flesh. That's what it is. So it's possible that these men who were preaching from selfish motives were jealous because Paul had a strong popularity among Christians. He was the Christian to be, right? And they sadly desired that popularity for themselves. Do you ever see somebody do something really great and you're like, man, wow, they are doing it, right? And maybe there's a little bit of envy, like, well, I tried something like that before. Why didn't that work for me? So we fall away from rejoicing that, yeah, it's different than we would have done it, but it's still proclaiming God. So they preached Paul's message in order to gain Paul's popularity. They didn't envy Christ, who is the message they preached. They envied the person. They envied Paul, his gifts, his usefulness, his success in ministry, even though he was in bonds. And guess what? They took this opportunity to see if they could get the same success, the same honor, the same applause, preaching Christ as Paul had done. I love it. One commentator even mentions that these people competed with each other to see who could preach Christ the best and the clearest. All right, so then there were the ones with the selfless motives. Goodwill means that they were willing and freely shared the gospel for only Jesus. I don't know if you've ever heard that song by Casting Crowns called Only Jesus, but you know, in the verses in the chorus, the song basically says, Like, it doesn't matter what else I do. If it's not for Jesus, I want to leave a legacy that shows that only Jesus was my focus, right? That's what these selfless people were doing. They loved it. They loved and had a sincere desire to spread the gospel and to promote the Redeemer. Verses 16 and 17 go on to describe these men. So in verse 16, it says, the latter do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition rather than pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment. He's in prison, like, distress? Really? You got to cause him distress? One thing that I thought was really cool and kind of opened my eyes to it is commentators went back and forth on how these verses should be listed. A lot of commentators like, no, you should have talked about the former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition. And if you really look at it, it makes sense the way it is, because he is saying in verse 15, some also do from good will. The latter do it out of love. It's a sentence. He's continuing his thought on that group. So Paul is contrasting these two categories of preachers. He says the latter do it out of love. He starts off with the bold and courageous preachers who preach out of sincerity and truth. Like I said before, this is the group that truly believed and understood that the gospel message was one of salvation for all those who repented. But the big part I want you to understand is they did it out of love. It's important that something is rooted in the motive of love, or the Bible says it amounts to nothing. You could do all these things, but if it's not coming from a motive of love, then it is for nothing. So I'm going to flip over to 1 Corinthians because Paul actually says it pretty well there. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3, 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3, he says, if I speak with the tongues of men and angels, but do not have love, I love this verse, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. All right, so if I have the gift of prophecy and know all ministry, I kept saying that yesterday too, mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. He is saying that if we don't start with sincere love, we are doing nothing. All the gifts that help us minister to people and how we share the gospel with someone, if we're not coming from a place of sincere love, it will amount to nothing for us. So Paul was appointed for the defense of the gospel, which he kind of brings up there. And remember, verse 12, we read it, even if they didn't. His imprisonment is a hindrance, not a hindrance, but an opportunity, which means the next group of preachers that we're going to see in verse 17 did not see the picture at all. I don't know why they're not reading these verses. I don't know. But I'm kidding. I'm just so you know. Keely gave me a look. Nah, I'm just kidding. So it means this next group of preachers saw the wrong picture. The Greek for selfish ambition here, so it talks about self-ambition, here is, and I'm sorry if I say this wrong, aretha. It means the desire for personal gain or advancement, often at the expense of others. They weren't being sincere with their intentions. And I will tell you that sincerity can lead to division in church. And if you read Paul in all the things he talks about, you know that he warns against insincerity a lot, like a lot. They were distressing Paul in an already distressing situation. He was imprisoned. He was in bonds, and they were trying to distress him for the good of themselves. But I love that we see the irony right away. That is where these preachers are sharing the true gospel. Their intention is to put distress on Paul, but Paul finds joy regardless of their motives. Yeah, I always say, like, Paul finds joy regardless of their motives. I like to call that hard to do, but called to do. Um, so in verse 18, he kind of brings this all together by saying, "What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I rejoice. Yes, again, I will say that I rejoice." So what I want you to see here is while we talk about these different preachers, Paul is rejoicing. Paul is rejoicing. I want you to think back in your life that there may have been a time where you have seen somebody and you're like, ugh, I think their motives are wrong. Yeah, they're doing a lot of good stuff for the church. Like, don't get me wrong. They're here every day putting things up on the shelves and making sure we're all connected. But I don't know if their motives are right. It's none of your business. Okay? I just want to put that out there. None of your business about the motives. If they are preaching the true gospel and following what God has for them, rejoice with them. It's going to be hard sometimes, but that's what we're supposed to be doing, is we are supposed to be rejoicing. That is what Paul is saying in here. Also, another thing that came to mind. So, of course, when I study and I'm like studying motives, I start, thinking of motives, right? Because so many times your motives can start in the right place, right? But the further you go along, maybe your motives change a little bit. And you have to make sure that you're doing check-ins with yourself to say, are my motives still correct? So before I say this, I want you to know that my husband does not feel like this, but this was a good example, okay? So everybody heard me say that. I told him I was going to share it, and I was like, I will make sure to tell him that, this is not a dig. So we were talking about, my husband does a podcast called Outside the Sanctuary, right? It's been something that has been laid on his heart for a very long time. We prayed about it. He prayed about it. It's something that he just really wanted to do.
It's very good.
Thank you. Well, I guess I shouldn't say thank you. He thanks you. So with that podcast, we started to talk about the other day. And again, every time, I don't know if the other Sunday school teachers feel like this, but every time you study something, it's like right there, So I'm thinking about motives, and my husband came up to me and he's like, look, on Spotify, we got this many listeners in one day. And I was like, great. And later on, we were talking, and he's like, I wonder how I could get more listeners. And that's where it stopped. But I was like, where does it change that if he had said something like, well, I don't want to do this unless I can get this many followers? Or, I don't want to do it unless I start getting paid for it. Which, again, I will tell you, the podcast is a lot of work. But as long as I believe when you're doing something that you stay focused on Jesus and you're always hearing his answer, his voice, then you're doing the right thing. Doesn't matter doesn't matter if you feel somebody thinks that your motives are wrong for something. If you can truly say that I prayed about this and God has directed me to what I'm doing, then you're in the clear. You are not these preachers of Paul. Okay? I think about, and again, I feel like I have a lot of side notes today. There are a lot of big preachers out there I call them TV preachers. And again, doesn't matter who they are. Sorry, Christine, I probably have just popped Christine's ear. When I first became a Christian 10 years ago, I wanted everything to be Jesus. I wanted to be with him every second of every day. So, you turn on the TV and you see these people, And this week I started to think, like, they're preaching the true gospel. Their motives may be wrong about why they're doing it, but there are people like me when I was first learning and hearing this word about God and Jesus and those things, that was good. It changed me. It made me grow, and it made me seek out more. So just remembering that, again, if you're hearing or sharing the true gospel, that motive, God can work through it. So I don't want you to worry about, you saying, well, that Donna doesn't have the right one, Keely doesn't have the right one. I don't know why I picked you two. I'm really sorry. So it was just in my eye line. You don't have to worry about it. I just took something really big off your plate because it's something we love to do, especially as women, is we like to say, well, they're not doing the right thing, or they're not doing it the way that I want. And the reason that I bring that up before we get into verse 18 is because that's where Paul talks about all of that with these men. So in verse 18, it says, what then? Only in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I will rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice. I love that Paul starts with what then? Anytime Paul sounds like he's from Jersey, I'm all about it. Because when I look this up, he's saying, what then? So he's saying, hello, what's the issue? What's the problem? What's going on? Why do you guys have so many problems? What's happening here? So it's a rhetorical question that Paul uses here to address the concerns about the motives of those preaching Christ. Paul wants the people to focus on the core issue, the gospel, rather than getting entangled in disputes, which we're going to see a little bit later in Philippians, that he gets real clear with who's causing the disputes. All right? We don't want to get entangled. It's not worth it. It's not where we should be. He is writing to the Philippians to emphasize message over messenger. I love that Paul is acknowledging that here there needs to be diverse methods and motivations behind preaching the gospel. By him saying in every way in that verse, it shows that he knew about the early church's different landscapes where these individuals were sharing the gospel. So in this phrase, he's suggesting a broader acceptance of different approaches in the message, if the message of Christ is at the center. So just saying, I'm sorry, but Keely, right? She's like, I'm never coming again. But sharing the gospel in the United States is probably very different than sharing the gospel to the Aboriginal people, I'm guessing, right? Yes. So we have these different landscapes. Sharing the gospel for somebody with me on the street that I just met, and I'm talking about the gospel, versus how I quietly and keep going sharing the gospel with people at work. It's different. It's a different landscape. It doesn't mean that the gospel message has changed. It's still the same gospel message. All right? So Paul recognizes that some preach from envy while others do out of goodwill, and that is a reality of human nature and personal ambitions with spiritual. Let me try that again. Paul recognizes that some preach from envy while others do out of goodwill. That is a reality of human nature and personal ambitions mingled with spiritual missions. Because guess what? They all come into play as you're doing spiritual missions. Paul, understands human imperfection and the complex Christian community. He talks about it all throughout Philippians, Ephesians, and the emphasis on Christ being preached, regardless of intent, should highlight the power and the sovereignty of the gospel message on its own. It does the job, right? The gospel message on its own. He says, and in this I will rejoice, and yes, I will continue to rejoice. Paul's joy is rooted in the gospel message being shared, not the personal circumstances or the motives of others. So we shouldn't be either. you'll see this deep spiritual, I don't know why I can't read today. You will see this deep spiritual maturity and joy all throughout the book of Philippians, and Paul's unwavering in his commitment to Christ and the mission of the church, even in his circumstances. And that is a powerful testimony that you're going to see. So it's evident in these verses that certain Christians were jealous of Paul. But again, they weren't false teachers. I don't want you to think they were. They were preaching the true gospel. They were all genuine Christians. What did they struggle with? Envy. They were jealous of Paul, right? Evidently, they felt that they were there first, and they felt that perhaps he had laid claim to some of their position. Does this sound familiar? No? Nobody? All right. So they were there first. They felt that Paul had claimed some of their positions. There is always a readiness for envy. It's there. We all have it in us. Yeah, right? Paul had come in, and these guys who were first, right, doing it the way they always done it, he saw a place where he could say it better. He could dispel some of those things that they were teaching, and in the powerful Holy Spirit, the logical authority that Paul, as he preached to them, had. But guess what? Now they see a chance to regain their popularity. The first is first. They start to plan a large campaign in Rome and nearby cities, hoping to outshine Paul in his efforts and enthusiasm for spreading the gospel. They see their moment. And guess what? They're hopeful that when word gets back to Paul, this one really hit me, I'm sorry. So they're hoping when word gets back to Paul that he will feel just a little bit of the envy that they feel, right? They're hoping, will he feel it? The envy, the jealousy, the pain I feel. But I hate to tell you, and I hate to tell them, Paul could care less. He does not care. He does not care what they think. He's like, you're out there preaching the gospel. Great job. I don't care. His generous spirit in Christ only makes him happy that Christ is being preached. He says it doesn't matter whether they are doing it to make me feel bad or not. That's a hard feeling to overcome, right? When you feel like somebody is making you feel bad. But he's saying, who cares? Who cares? Christ is being preached, and in that we should rejoice. So I kind of ended with a couple questions here that I want you to think on. Are we where Paul is with this joy, with this rejoicing? Can we take the success of others? Can we accept that we don't know someone's motives, but they're still working for God's kingdom? These are one of the hardest tests of Christian maturity. And some commentators believe that there's no clearer mark of Christian maturity than being able to genuinely rejoice. Not just say saintly words, but genuinely rejoice in the success of another believer. Right? So, I am going to do some prayer. Thank you very much. I had a lot of fun writing this lesson because I truly believe that being able to focus on the motive that you have and always checking in with yourself is only going to bring you closer to God and help you grow in a way that you may have never thought about before. If you can.
Yeah, if you want to continue.
Okay.